In this video, I'll be introducing a concept that I call relevant factor analysis. So what is relevant factor analysis? So basically, it's just a method for analyzing a problem and predicting an outcome. So if you have something and you don't know how it works or how it behaves, this would give you a method to analyze how it behaves and come up with a way to create a function or create a method that can predict how it behaves or what the outcome is of a function. And to put it simply, it's just as it sounds. It's just determining what factors are relevant, so what matters, what affects the end result, and also determining to what extent is the end result affected by each factor. Now, I do want to note that this is my own theory, and I don't say that to brag. I say that because there's nothing that I can point to and say, well, this justifies my idea or this proves that it's true. There's nothing like that. So you should remain skeptical of it, and you should decide if you believe it based on how well I'm able to support it. So if I can support my idea well, then you should if you think I've supported my idea well, then you should believe it. And if you feel like I haven't done very well at supporting my idea, then you should be skeptical of it. And then you should also allow your opinion to change as you get more information. So, for example, if you think it's a good idea, but in the future you try it out and it doesn't seem to be working, then you should allow your opinion to change and come to the conclusion that maybe it's not that good of an idea, maybe it doesn't work. Or on the other side of things, if you think it's not a good idea and then you try it out or you hear more information and you start to realize, oh, it sounds more reasonable than I thought, you should allow your opinion to change the other way as well. And I emphasize that so much because one of the big points of all these videos is to get other people to think for themselves and come up with their own ideas. So the goal is not to just blindly believe things or blindly disbelieve things. Like, I don't want you to just believe me because you think I'm smart, and I don't just want you to disbelieve me because I'm just a random person on the internet. I want you to listen to the argument and listen to the facts that support it and then come to your own conclusion. Now, to go back to the topic of relevant factor analysis, why does it matter and why is it important? Well, to really understand what it does is it simplifies a problem in a way that a human can actually process it. So, a large problem might have a whole bunch of different inputs. It might be uncountable, it might be an infinite number of inputs. So there's no way to actually process each input individually. But what you do is you group them up based on their relevant factors, and then you calculate the result to whatever you want to calculate based on the value of the factors. So you no longer have to deal with an uncountable number of distinct inputs. You group them up, and now you have a limited number of inputs that you can actually handle. And this is something that's necessary to do in order to analyze ideas in general. Now, when you do this, you're able to get closer to absolute truths. So, on the other hand, for things like studies, those only tend to only find vague trends or patterns, but they don't find absolute truths. So, what they find only has limited use. It may not apply to everyone because it's not the way it's looking for things isn't a way that will find something that's absolutely true and guaranteed to be true for everyone. Now, one of the big goals behind all of this is to make analysis accessible to anyone. So, as I go through this idea, you might realize that a lot of these things are things that everyone does naturally to some extent. So, the idea isn't so much to teach people something that's absolutely brand new that no one has ever done before. It's more describing what it is that people do and explaining how you can do it better, so it's not something that you have to do by instinct or by natural talent. I wanted it to be something that has more of a step-by-step method that anyone can follow. So if you wanted to reason out how something works, you could use a method like this, and I'll explain like how you would do it and how you would, like, the different things you would have to think about in different situations and all of that. Now, to go through a couple of examples, one example would be the theory of gravity. So gravity is one of those things, it's so broad that it applies to so many different objects that you wouldn't be able to come up with a theory and express it unless you group up all the objects based on certain relevant factors. And then when you have a limited number of factors that matter, you can actually create a usable theory and a useful theory. So in the case of gravity, instead of dealing with countless numbers of individual objects, what we do is we just say that the only relevant factors are the mass of the two objects we're looking at and the distance between the two objects. So those are the only relevant factors, so we don't need to know anything else. All we need to know is the value of the relevant factors. And then once we know that, we can actually calculate the result. And for a different example, let's say you want to analyze the game of Mahjong. Now, I'm going to be talking about the 4-player version, where you discard tiles and try to build a hand. But arguably, you could use the same method even for like the 2-player or the single-player version, where you just match tiles, or any other version out there. So, if you wanted to know how to become good at the game, you would have to know what is relevant to good decision making. What do you need to know in order to make a good decision at all? So what are the relevant factors? And one relevant factor is what is the chance of completing a certain shape. So you're trying to make groups of three numbers in the same suit that go together, like 1 suit 3, or 3 numbers that are the exact same tile and same suit. So you would want to know what are the chances of completing a certain shape, and then you can use the similarities between shapes to group them together, so you don't have to reformulate a new idea for each individual combination. So in this example below, for example, there's a 2 and a 4 of circles, and there's a 6 and a 7 of circles, and the 2 and the 4 is only completed by a 3, that's one tile, but the 6 and the 7 could be completed by a 5 or an 8, so that's 2 tiles, so that one is better. But you don't want to have to manually do that for every single possibility. Like, you don't want to have to say, okay, what about a 7 and an 8 of circles? What about a 5 and a 6 of circles? What about a 4 and a 5 of circles? What about 5 and a 6 of bamboo? What about 6 and a 7 of bamboo? You want to recognize that they're all the same, so there's only one relevant factor there. It's the type of shape it is, so then you can group them all up and process them in the same way. So by grouping up different situations under the same relevant factors, that allows you to create an idea that covers every case without having to explicitly state or explicitly analyze every single case individually. Now, to go through a simple overview of the whole idea, the basic thing that you have to do is that when you're approaching a problem, you have to think of all the factors you can that could possibly affect the outcome. So you're trying to find every single relevant factor you can think of. So if you're doing something science related and trying to predict how an object behaves in a certain situation, you would want to try and come up with all the things that could affect the object's behavior, and then make sure you keep track of all of those things. And if you're talking about a multiplayer game and you're trying to come up with a strategy for the game, you want to think of all the things that might affect your decisions, like what might impact your decision making, what might cause you to make a different choice in a certain situation. And then, in order to completely solve a problem, you have to know all of the meaningful factors. So you have to make sure that you're not missing any relevant factors. Because if you are, then your solution will be too simple. It'll be missing something. So it won't be true in all cases, because whatever factors you're missing, those will change the result based on what the value of that factor is. And then you also are going to want to be looking for absolutes. So you're going to want to find things that are always true, and not just like trends, or not just it seems to be true more often than not. You want to find things that are absolute. Now, that doesn't mean that other things aren't useful. For example, if you find things that are almost always true, that's good, but it actually creates its own sub-problem. So then you could investigate, well, what factors cause it to not always be true? So in what situations is it not true? And now you have a new problem, and you can analyze that sub-problem in the same way. But this is just an overview of the idea, and I'll go into a lot of the details in other videos. So that's all for this video.